welcome to the DADS Television Network. From time to time we come to you with interesting programming, and this time we will talk about what fathers are doing across the country. Many of you have seen me as your host talking about fathers' issues, and many of you are unaware that there are fathers' organizations all over the country. So I thought what we would do this hour is to spend some time taking a peek in at various meetings across the country to see what other fathers' rights organizations are doing. It's interesting to see how all of this is coming together for the benefit of fathers and what the fathers across the country are talking about. For the most part, they have been ignored by the major news media sources, so we're going to focus on them for the next hour. I wonder if we might take a look at that meeting that we have a tape of that happened on the East Coast. I want to introduce a fellow by the name of Chuck Faber. Chuck Faber is out of Ohio, the Toledo area, and the meeting happens to take place, I believe this meeting is in the New York area. Let's see if we can roll that clip, please.
Affiliated with the Fathers for Equal Rights groups in that area. Our group was originally a sort of a sister or brother chapter of the Fathers for Equal Rights of America out of Detroit, Michigan. Al LeBeau being the president of that group, and a real dynamite individual who has been in the media's attention on numerous occasions. But let me say that our subject this morning is that of the unwed father, of the laws, statutes as they exist, case law.
Assumption of legitimacy, and this is a key word, is legitimacy, always laid in the hands of the mother, the presumed father, which is whatever man she was married to at the time the child was born, and the child itself could rebut this concept of legitimacy. And before I continue, let me try to explain from a legal aspect what legitimacy is. We have a very old concept. It's common law. It's almost every culture has it. To inherit, you must be a legitimate child, because inheritance came traditionally through the father. Property, name, titles, whatever. So the concept came up is that if a child was born outside of the institution of marriage, the child had no right to inherit. They had no right to name. They had no right to any kind of status in life, and they became almost non-persons.
And that's an example of one of the meetings. Again, back on the East Coast, as they talk about the rights of fathers. Some of the fathers are, of course, unwed fathers, and they too are looking for their rights. Fathers have all sorts of problems. Again, the problems and the challenges that fathers have not been necessarily addressed by your major or mainstream news sources. What I'd like to do is bring up another meeting, if I might, of fathers, if we could perhaps have the volume on that particular rerun cut down, and deal with a fellow that's in Arizona, a fellow by the name of Bob Hirschfeld, who's an attorney in Phoenix. And he deals primarily with fathers' issues too. Now he happens to be at this same meeting along with a fellow by the name of Jim Cook. Jim Cook is head of the Joint Custody Association out of the Los Angeles area. So what we have is a mix of fathers at this particular meeting discussing the various issues of custody and paternity and the legalese as they see it. Let's see if we can have that additional clip of the fathers meeting on the East Coast.
NCM did in fact issue a press release related to an appeals court decision on Davis v. Davis that just came out and was in the paper yesterday morning, and the timing was excellent. I'd like to read to you the release. I'll give you a little background on this case, and I'd like to read to you the release that went out. This case is the one involving the frozen embryos. The couple from, I believe it was Tennessee, that were having difficulty conceiving, and they remove the eggs from the wife, and then they were fertilized artificially. And then the wife decided she didn't like the husband anymore and decided she wanted to take the fertilized eggs. The lower court held that the father had no rights, that she had all the rights to these. Yes, I'm sorry.
They were fertilized artificially with the natural father's sperm.
That is correct.
So this is really,
that is correct.
The embryo belonged to these two parents.
That is correct. The lower court determined the positive right. Anyway, the National Congress for Men today commended the Tennessee Court of Appeals decision supporting men's reproductive rights in the Davis v. Davis frozen embryo case. The court ruled that Junior Davis and the former Sue Davis must share the 7 frozen fertilized embryos they created while married.
And back to the studio here. That particular clip was of Russell Fish. Russell Fish is of the Bay Area, and he too is talking about father's issues. Of course, that particular issue was the one where the Tennessee couple who was not able to have a child by normal procedures had the egg fertilized outside of the womb, and they were frozen. And in the original case, the judge had given sole custody of those fertilized eggs to the woman, and later on the judge in an appeals decision had awarded the fertilized eggs to both parties. And Russell Fish in that particular clip was merely giving some information about that. Unfortunately, we will not be able to go into any of these discussions in great depth. The objective here is to show you as many faces as possible dealing with the issue that fathers have in custody cases or paternity cases or adoption cases, and how that affects guys across the country. Wherever you may be viewing this particular tape, please be aware that there is a father's rights organization somewhere near you. Again, whether it's on the West Coast in Seattle, the office is DADS Against Discrimination, on 2nd Avenue in the Smith Tower, or Portland, again, DADS Against Discrimination in downtown Portland, or in some other part of the country. Many of these groups are trying to come together. Sometimes they're known as fathers' rights groups, sometimes they're known as fathers' advocacy groups. Wherever they are, they're known for their efforts to secure more rights for fathers. They're also known to be ignored by the media. Let's get back to that meeting on the East Coast, and let's see if we can get Bob Hirschfeld, who happens to be attending that meeting from Phoenix, Arizona, and Jim Cook from Los Angeles, California.
On Jim's show, we set this thing up, and you don't realize it, but it's sort of back and forth, and it helps get audience attention. Absolutely great and important idea to do something legislatively about keeping the reestablishment of paternity rights open. A good vehicle for it, and to remember, is that a custody decision is always open to review by the court. Why, in fact, should a parental rights case not also be open for review by the court, particularly if it's a non-adoption case?
That was Jim Cook. Now, I don't know what happened to Bob Hirschfeld in those particular clips. He was there earlier. Maybe we'll find him somewhere down the line. Again, the idea is to show you as many fathers as possible who are concerned with the plight that fathers are having. Did you know that probably in your neck of the woods, wherever you may live, United Way has no resource money for a father's shelter home or father's crisis line? Did you know also that the federal government has not spent any money on social services, statistically speaking, for fathers who have problems with their families and want to keep those families intact? In fact, as the family comes to be an issue in this election year, you will not find that father is defined into the definition of families. It's the father's not part of it for federal governmental purposes. Perhaps the reason for that is that those groups that are seeking funds of whatever kind, they want to be called a family. But fathers apparently are not defined into the word family for governmental purposes of distributing money, whether it is welfare money or food stamps or an intact family, just is not part of the scene. I've often wondered why we would not want to prioritize types of families. If people want to recognize different kinds of family, then why not prioritize the different kinds of family and putting the two-parent family at the head of the priority list and the single-parent family at the bottom of the priority list? Or maybe those other style families which may have people living together with same sex or same gender trying to call themselves a family. I would think that we would want to save and prioritize the traditional family, giving tax breaks and any benefits we can to the traditional style family, and less to the perhaps newfound family or new style families. Let's go back to that, I think we're still at that meeting, and see if we can have additional input from fathers across the country.
Resources from women's groups or someplace. They went back in and said, Judge, we've made a mistake. She didn't know what was going on. We want you to reverse that decision. Here we have a different situation in which the man went in and said, I'm not going to fight this. I mean, he was in court. He probably knew that his parental rights were being terminated. He assumed that also terminated his obligations. He figured he wouldn't have to pay child support, and I suspect that's why he didn't fight it. That's not a very noble reason for what he did, and I'm not proud of representing somebody who didn't stand up and say, it's my child. On the other hand, his child knows and loves him. He knows and loves his child, and I think something has to be done to allow that relationship to be restored in a state where there is no mechanism for it to be done. So that's, anybody want to say anything?
I'd like to make an additional comment.
You want to come up here?
Sure.
Okay, no, I'm done with what I wanted to say.
As part of the Bob and Jim show, we set this thing up.
That's where Bob Hirschfeld was. The fellow that came up at the end was Jim Cook. The fellow who did most of the talking up front was Bob Hirschfeld. Again, Bob Hirschfeld practices law in Phoenix, Arizona, and Jim Cook runs an organization called the Joint Custody Association out of Los Angeles, California, and has a mailing list. So those of you who want to find out more about these fellows, either look up their names in the respective cities, or if you'd like, write to me at DADS. That's DADS Against Discrimination, P.O. Box 8525, Portland, Oregon 97207. And by the way, we welcome your contributions. We are a charity, as you know. We've got some tape also on a meeting in Seattle. Are we going to take that Seattle meeting at this time? All right, let's see if we can roll in take a peek at Bob Carls, who runs the DADS office in Seattle, Washington, and part of his meeting.
Step-parent obligations. I think I have it right here. Prior to this change, the step-parent, when they got filed for divorce, the step-parent was obligated to continue paying for support for children that were not his children until the divorce was final. Now a step-parent can motion to terminate step-parent support upon the filing of the petition for dissolution. Frequently, dissolutions would go on for 2 years in King County here, and the step-parent would be paying child support for children that weren't really his all of that time.
And back with you. Again, Bob runs the DADS office in Seattle, and if you'd like to call them, that's area code 206, of course, 623-3761. Meetings are held periodically. There's no particular schedule to that, and maybe it would be beneficial if we could announce a schedule for these various meetings. At this time, we're not able to do that. Hope to be able to do that in the near future. I would suggest that you continue to watch these programs. You will find them full of information, especially the information that the fathers can use. I guess we're going to pause now for station break, and we'll be right back with you in about 10 or 15 seconds. On whether we're going to hold with it or not. Back with you. Bob's meetings are held periodically, as I have suggested, and you just saw a number of offices of DADS across the country. I'd like to get through the general meetings that Bob holds up there, and we'll go to another part of the country after having visited Seattle again. Now, if I can put this into perspective, what we've done so far in the first few minutes of the program is to visit a meeting on the East Coast. We are now visiting a DADS meeting on the West Coast, Seattle more specifically, and we'll go to other parts of the country. So let's continue that particular meeting, or perhaps it's a different meeting, I guess, in the Seattle area.
In situations, I know at one time they were garnishing, you know, if they find out you're married to a second person, they garnish your check, you know, and then they'll also, if they garnish your IRS return, her half, you know, there's this form they send you where her half has to come back. They claim, and if there's other kids involved from the second marriage or whatever, they claim that, you know, the courts are supposed to be thinking of the kids. Well, they don't give a damn about the kids in the second marriage, the second household. Or even if you've gotten married, or, you know, and you want to have kids. In my own personal situation, if I didn't have a very supportive wife, I mean, you know, at first we had a hell of a time because, you know, she was going through hell trying to basically stick by me, you know. But it's a lot of pressure on the women that are with, you know, that in second marriages and second relationships. They go through a lot of hell. Yeah. And it seems like the courts don't. They're one-sided. They're looking at the other person, but they don't care about the second person or the second kids. Right. You know, and
there's things that you can do about that. And I'll give you a few suggestions here. Is first of all, if you're remarried or whether you're just living with a new girlfriend, you just don't have joint bank accounts. Okay?
And that's a response from Bob in Seattle. Again, he's been at this for about 15 years. Same here, and some of the other fellows that you have seen in the clips have invested years into this issue of fathers' rights. I might bring to your attention that we are developing some expertise along particular lines, and to perhaps benefit from that, you're going to have to attend or get in touch with a fathers' rights organization, if not one near you, someone or some group in the area of your interest. Just because you live in the Northwest or perhaps the Southwest or the Southeast doesn't mean that you should not have some sort of contact with a fathers' rights organization in the other part of the country. You should be aware of what they're doing, what their levels of experience are, and what their expertise are. Also, since this is an election year, it's a good time to start asking your politicians about the issues that are important to you. For instance, why is it that the federal government has established a federal poverty level, but if you happen to be a father living below the federal poverty level, you are not entitled to a break in child support? You have to continue paying as if there was no federal poverty level in existence, even though the government, on the other hand, has probably provided for the children. So fathers really do need a break. I've had some fathers come to me over the past few years saying that they're looking for a job, but because the economy is bad, not only a bad economy, but even when they find a job, they have to deal with the problems of the affirmative action programs that are out there. They're being stymied for jobs, and they're put at the back of the line. How can a father pay child support if he has to deal with a big institution that has a government contract and as a consequence has to perhaps install an affirmative action program, hiring more women than men initially, and putting the men, in essence, at the back of the hiring line, just because he's a man. And at that instant, of course, they are forgetting the fact that some of these men have obligations and responsibility for child support. And then you have once a year when the federal government puts out its statistics about deadbeat dads. And by the way, that's going to come out every May. If you look back in your news reports on an annual basis, you'll find that that comes out every year. The reason for that is that states are required to provide the federal government with their performance audits, and then the federal government shares the performance audit back with the public by way of a news leak or news release saying that we've got so many deadbeat dads. What they're not telling you is that the system is designed wrong. It does not have any sort of provisions for fathers to obtain jobs. And so therefore, when the system fails, they have someone to blame the failure on rather than to say that their welfare system is perfect. Only if the dads would cooperate, it would be just fine and dandy. Let's check in with, oh, I guess there's a clip here. I did make an appearance once. I was offered to appear one time with Mr. Donahue. Everyone knows Phil Donahue. Let's see what that's all about. So I wonder if we can roll that tape.
Said that she wanted to live with me. She started at that point paying an ongoing hell. And this is something that, because I was there when she was sick, when I was there to go to the PTA meetings, the things that her mother didn't want to go to, because I was a participatory parent. To me, good parenting knows no gender. But yet, I had to fight very strongly in court in order to have the custody that this child wanted to have.
Even though you had a physically abusive spouse.
That's right. I mean,
if a man is physically abusive, that's it. It's over. If they take his house, they take his car, they take his kids, everything. But there's a duality again.
Our daughter had to go through 10 months of physical abuse while being with her mother alone, out of state, for it to be proven absolutely that she was a physically abusive mother and wife. And that was wrong for our daughter.
And we'll be back in a moment.
Anyway, we have been trumpeting this particular note for a number of years, that fathers should have shelter homes, crisis lines, and so on, just like the other gender does. It seems to be some sort of a social phenomena in our society that the benefit dollars only goes to one gender, and that would be female, and no social benefit dollars are provided for men or for the male. Again, when's the last time you've heard of a crisis line for fathers or a shelter network? After all, they're the ones that get kicked out of their homes, and they're the same ones that have to go to work the next day, hopefully clean-shaven and having had a shower. But if you're kicked out of your home with what is called a restraining order, it makes it very difficult to keep an on-the-job presence as the rest of the employees would like you to be, clean-shaven and showered. Some of the basics in life are being denied these guys when they go through these domestic relations problems. Again, with the notion of getting as much tape in here as possible from some of the meetings across the country, I want to see if we can focus in on the Florida area to see if we've got Ken Pangborn, maybe, that we can bring him to the screen.
The door for the female to take the places.
Every day I read the newspaper, tells me that we haven't come away from physical aggression. If anything, what we're seeing in our homes, and hopefully, somebody will look at some of these studies and realize that the home front has become a battleground. I mean, we've got husbands battering wives, wives battering husbands, fathers and mothers battering their children in epidemic proportions in this country. We're not getting less violent. We're more violent than we've ever been.
And again, that particular issue came out of the northern Florida area, Tallahassee, not quite that far north, a little south of that, Hillsborough County area in Florida. So the point here is that a number of guys across the country are addressing the issues that fathers have. And again, those issues that fathers have are custody of their children. Perhaps they can do as good a job, if not better, than the way we're dealing with it right now. Once you take a look at the statistics of the dropout rate in school, the kids who are addicted with drugs, the fact that our children now are a more violent and militant society, the fact that children are ready to riot at a moment's notice, join gangs because they do not have perhaps a family structure to lean on, so they must lean on the gang structure in the nearby neighborhood. Perhaps fathers ought to be an alternative that our system, our society ought to look at. It's far cheaper than putting these guys in prison or putting out gang riots and so on in various cities across the country. I continue to wonder why fathers are not looked upon as a real good resource to take care of the children as they are growing up, to discipline those children, and to make sure that they lead and live productive lives as young adults. I believe that the system, as we have dealt with it over the past 20 years, has its proof right there in the pudding. I don't think our society is any better off, and I think that every one of you would agree with that. So perhaps it's time to clean the slate and start out anew let's start giving fathers custody and control of their families. I think the whole notion of father knows best might be a real good notion to consider or revisit for those of you who have not heard of that, and I realize that there's a whole generation that has grown up. You may want to take a look at that. Those societies in the past which honored their father as well as the mother were successful societies, and I think we ought to get back to looking to that right now. If we're going to take a break, let's pause and take a break and come out on the other side of the break with a little bit of the other side of the coin. Let's see what some of the women's groups are talking about. And back with you. Apparently that was long enough to get Bob's meeting back in there again. You know, over the past 20 years or so, there's been a development or an evolution of a group of people known as the National Organization for Women. Some of us call it the feminist agenda and so on. But many of us, including the women themselves, have no idea what that group is all about. Please notice that there is a distinction, if you'd care to use it, between a women's organization and perhaps a mother's organization. And I think that we ought to be a little more concerned with the issues and qualities of mothers and the benefits that they provide to our society as opposed to women, some of whom are not mothers. And just because a female is able to become a mother does not mean that she has the qualities of a mother. And many of the benefits that come from the various agencies are not benefits for mothers, they're benefits for women. So please notice how the agencies don't necessarily want to recognize the fact that mothers, women who are indeed mothers, do need help. It's not just women who need help. And if you think I'm toying with words of insignificance about the difference and the distinction between women and those women who are mothers, please take a look at what CBS News had to say.
We're over him with a car.
Robin Heiss is a counselor at the United Fathers of America office in Anaheim, California, one of only a handful of places in the country where battered men can find help. She is herself a reformed husband beater. You mean to tell me that you beat up on your husbands?
2.
Did you beat up on them, or did you just slap them around a little bit?
No, I actually beat them up. I used to have a temper. I mean, a really bad one. And I didn't slap, I punched. I kicked, I spit, whatever.
You hurt them?
Oh, yeah.
You know, there are a lot of people out there that are skeptical about women beating up on their husbands. Do you really think that this is a big problem out there that we ought to know about?
Yes, I really do. Most men won't report it. It's not macho. The problem is the men don't call the police.
Okay, I was caught a little off guard on that one, and that's an NBC report that came out a while back, and we've taken reports from various sources, and we would like to share them with you and give credit where credit is due. We also took a report from CBS at one time. The news team developed the information on the women. Now let's get back to that particular report. Did you put that?
President of Georgia's chapter of NOW, the National Organization for Women. She is also a lesbian.
Lesbians are certainly a full half of the activist band in NOW.
Elodie Behan, who heads the New York City chapter of NOW, is a lesbian.
Lesbians have always been in leadership positions in the organization.
They join a growing number in the highly visible women's rights group who are coming out, including NOW's president, who takes over on Sunday.
I have discussed my life, and I have a husband, and I have a companion.
The revelations come at a time when many believed NOW was in position to galvanize feminists. In the month after the Clarence Thomas hearings, for example, NOW's new membership tripled. With sexual harassment as the issue, NOW seemed to be moving more toward the mainstream. Apparently not.
We are not a mainstream organization, and we never have been, and we don't want to be.
Could have fooled me. I thought it was a mainstream organization.
Georgia State Senator Judy Moy is a NOW member who's worried increasing emphasis on lesbian rights, one of NOW's top 4 priority issues, could create negative baggage for women seeking office.
The National Organization of Women to me means an organization that will address all of women's issues. And if they do not wish to do that and have decided to send it in a certain direction, then they need to change the name.
NOW has been the most visible leader in the feminist movement, enjoying the lion's share of resources and attention for 25 years. But even the woman who founded NOW says that can change.
NOW is one organization, and if it chooses a direction away from the mainstream, then it will be supplanted as a cutting-edge organization.
NOW's leaders make it clear, though, they're not going to ignore the lesbian agenda.
We have got to get that battle done and over with. We have to.
Which battle is that?
The battle to take the sting, take the threat out of being called a lesbian.
NOW's leaders believe the lesbian issue is no big deal, not a concern for next year's elections. Others think, though, it could have all the makings of a battle royal, potentially beginning a serious rift in the feminist movement. Erin Hayes, CBS News, Atlanta.
Again, I would like to ask you to consider in the future the difference between what is called a women's movement, and that would be for some women, perhaps many, who are not mothers, or even have an interest in the men around here, and a mother's movement. So they're not necessarily one and the same. It would appear to me that on the East Coast and the West Coast, there is a different perception of what this particular movement is all about. I thought I would show you a clip like that to let you know. The same is true with the men's movement. We classify ourselves as a father's organization. We're concerned with fathers' rights. We are not necessarily part of a men's movement who would find men that would go out into the field and build campfires and yell at the moon and hoop and howl and get into a sweat lodge. We don't see any value in that, personally. And for those who want to do that, that's fine. But we're part of what is called a father's movement. And Dads Against Discrimination, in my opinion, leads that father's movement. If you wish to be part of it, please look up one of the groups in your city and let's get the action done. This is an election year. The things that you need to do would be to contact your local politician, both state and federal. Ask what he is doing for you as a father. Ask about the deduction which disappeared for many fathers in the 1986 Tax Reform Act. Oh yes, the deduction where you could deduct child support and have an exemption for that particular child. After 1986 and our Senator Bob Packwood leading the Tax Reform Act, that particular benefit to fathers disappeared. In its place was a federal form, 8232, I believe, or 8283, which the custodial parent, usually the mother in more than 95% of the cases, would have to give the permission for the father to take the child as an exemption on his tax form. In fact, it was called to my attention a while back that to create a better recovery program for welfare, they ought to give these fathers a tax incentive. And if they had a tax incentive, I wonder if that would increase the collections ratio or the pay ratio, along with, of course, some teeth in the law which would find any custodial parent denying visitation in contempt. Right now, most fathers realize that trying to find the custodial parent, and 95% of the cases of mother, in contempt for denial of visitation is almost a joke. And it's a very bad joke at that, because he has to pay his attorney about $150 an hour to go through that futile exercise. Well, we've got other meetings to look in on, and it's my objective here to get as much of this in the future as, or in this program as possible. Let's see if we can look in on a father who made some note here, trying to find his daughter. His child was born in Oregon, although conceived in the state of California. He's made national fame here by trying to chase the mother and his child all over the country. And the problem, of course, is that fathers are required by law to be responsible, and the word responsible is used, responsible for the child in terms of dollars and cents, but is not allowed to have any rights for the child in terms of, say, a caring, loving relationship. And when a woman chooses to, and notice I say woman, not a mother, when a woman chooses to adopt the kid out for the financial rewards that such a procedure would bring, the father all of a sudden is cut out of the picture. Perhaps there should be a law that says that if a child is adopted out, the father being known that maybe he's entitled to half of that money. In many cases, this does not occur in a financially sterile environment. There are financial considerations all the time. Let's take a look in on Mark Hyland and his pursuit of his child, trying to keep the child from being adopted.
Mark Hyland is looking for his baby boy, but this is the only photograph he has of the child, a sonogram taken of the fetus at 12 weeks. That was before fiancée Janet Onimus disappeared from their Southern California home while 7.5 months pregnant.
She just vanished one day. She just literally up and vanished.
Mark says Janet quit her job as a music teacher, had the baby in August, and eventually came to Oregon to put the child up for adoption.
The District Attorney's Office in Los Angeles has confirmed that some sort of adoption in regards to my child has either taken place or is taking place.
Mark has spent the past 6 months looking for Janet and the baby. A California court awarded him custody of the child. But under Oregon law, an unwed mother does not have to name the father before putting it up for adoption, and the state is not required to look for the man. The head of a father's rights group says the law is not fair.
Unfortunately, society in general thinks that fathers have absolutely nothing to say about it. And that is where the problem is. We as fathers in this society have to say, hey, wait a minute. The sperm is mine. I help. You couldn't do that. Well, part of that should have perhaps been taken out of there, but nonetheless, it is in there. Again, the plight that fathers have trying to keep track of their children, but then on the other hand being given a bum rap in society for being deadbeat dads or not responsible is probably a big challenge that we have to deal with. It's very, very interesting, of course, over the past 20 years to hear about the women's rights issue. Notice they want rights, they don't want responsibility, but you hear about the man's responsibility all of the time. In many cases, when some of these groups yell for rights, it's actually a right to do something without responsibility personally, and it burdens either the taxpayer or other people involved in the relationship. Whether it's the right to have an abortion or not, what abortion on demand at taxpayer expense, who's going to pay for that? The taxpayer or the father or who? If it's left up to the individual, if you can finance it yourself and you can do these things and you have everyone in line on that, then fine. But just a right without the responsibility required does raise, I think, a good social question, whatever that particular right is. And so often we've heard these rights being yelled for, and if you look at the responsibility behind the right, it appears that we as taxpayers, we as citizens, have to bear the responsibility or the social consequence. So just ending a phrase that whatever the right is without the responsibility or the discipline on the part of the party involved is kind of a half thought. I understand we're about ready to take a pause here in our program, and we're going to come right back with a little more information. Let's take a pause. Our objective is to show you as much about the fathers' issues and their movement across the country within this hour as possible. We have looked in on a meeting that occurred in the Great Lakes area of the country, more specifically in Wisconsin. And I hope we have that particular tape wound up and ready to go. There was about 10 guys meeting there from across the country, from New Mexico, from California, and Arizona. Let's see if we can see what the fathers group in the Great Lakes area was doing. Let's peek in on that meeting, please.
What we're going to do is
is each of us respectively from our own given areas and parts of the country have developed solutions. And the purpose of this gathering is that we will be able to disseminate those solutions to the other parts of the country that are not aware of it. I know most. Dr. Roy Shank from Madison, Wisconsin. The gentleman sitting quietly reading over there on his side, Rod Bivings from Los Angeles, California. Next to him would be Tom Farley from Arizona in Bath. Then we have Mr. Alpern from Chicago. We have Nat Denman from Falmouth, Massachusetts. Alongside of him would be Rob Cheney from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we have a few of our local members here, John Kowski and John McClellan. John McClellan's originally from California. He's gone across 4 different states to get his visitation thing straightened out, so he's got a story also to tell as we get on into the day.
Back with you, and again, that meeting took place just a few months ago, and that was in the Wisconsin area. I wonder if we can kill that volume on that particular piece of... Yes, thanks. The idea here is to give you as much information about fathers across the country as possible. If you happen to be a father out there in the viewing audience and you want to deal with the issues of fathers, I'm going to suggest that you look into the local group, Dads Against Discrimination, for instance, or any other group in the country, and get in touch with them to follow through on fathers' issues. Now, if there happens to be someone out there who wants to call in, and I have no idea of knowing, we did not necessarily prepare ourselves to have a lot of call-ins at this particular time, but if you are watching today, and the date is on the screen there, you might consider calling 667-7434. I've got a lot of numbers in my mind to memorize things. So if there is someone out there and you want to call in, please feel free to do so. Do we have a call, Chuck? All right, let's go ahead and put it through. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Chuck Applegate. I'm waiting to go on the air and talk to
You
Victor.
are on the air, Chuck.
Oh, okay, Victor. Say, I'd like to bring up a specific issue.
Would you talk louder, please?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up a specific issue in regards to ex-wives that take their children out of state, first of all, without letting the ex-husband know, and then being charged in contempt when visitation is ordered by the judge to occur, and then nothing happening when the contempt occurs, nothing happening to the ex-wife, mother, just drags and goes on and on. I'd like to address that and see what your response might be.
Well, thanks for calling, Chuck. I happen to know a little bit about Chuck's case. He has a custody issue out of the state of Oregon. The mother and the daughter moved to the state of Washington, actually disrespecting his divorce decree and visitation rights all over the place. There is a development in process called the Interstate Child Visitation Act. I don't know where that is along the scale of completion yet, but hopefully the issue that fathers have with visitation will be given as much weight as mothers primarily, and the collection of child support. I think that any time the child is taken out of the jurisdiction of the court that issued the decree, there ought to be a revisiting to the court or the judge to see if such a move is in the best interest of the child. In our area, for instance, I think that if you have a child and you're able to raise a child in one of our decent neighborhoods, it would be very difficult to improve upon the situation. Let's say if you moved to some of the big cities around the country and the child wound up living in perhaps a lesser social environment than we do have to offer here. So the issue of moving the child beyond the jurisdiction of the state or out of the reach of the visiting father I think surely is one that needs to be addressed. And I wonder if I can get some direction here, Mr. Floor Director, on the call pattern, and maybe just take a slight pause here for now and come back on another side of the break, if we can get one going through there.
Is there a break?
The circle is the basis of our beliefs, that everything is connected to everything else. All people and nature and the Creator. And no matter where you go or who you become, you are still part of it all. And that cannot be ignored. Never.
Help preserve the traditional American Indian cultures by supporting the 26 tribal colleges.
And are we gonna run that or not?
So he sent her back with her baby, saying, if you ever wrongly treat this child, it will turn back into a star. And that woman's sister tried to make the baby behave. She raised her hand and it disappeared. That's why traditional Blackfeet never mistreated their children. No way.
Help preserve the traditional American Indian cultures by supporting the 26 tribal colleges.
Okay, back with you. I wonder if you'd kill the volume on that. Okay, thanks. Yes, we do public service announcements from time to time. That particular one was, of course, for the Native American, and we would like to see that, of course, those groups that are entitled to some benefits do receive those benefits. Go ahead if we have that call on the line. Go ahead. We'll take the call. Hello, caller. Did we have the call through yet? All right, go ahead. Talk up. Well, the caller's going to have to talk up.
Hello.
Yeah.
Am I, yes?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay, great. Hey, Victor, first of all, great job. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
I have an issue here. I'm unemployed. I heard you talking a little bit about that on the show and some of the consequences. And I'm paying probably about 1/3 of my unemployment goes for child support, which, again, I feel is unfair. But my child support, my unemployment is running out. And what are some of the issues regarding that? Am I going to maintain the same amount every month, or is there a way around that? I mean, what happens?
Okay, thanks for calling. Very interesting question. For you guys out there that are involved in with the requirement of having to pay child support, but you do not have a job from which to pay child support from, you find yourself in a very precarious situation. Unfortunately, child support can accumulate while you're looking for a job. Unfortunately, you will probably wind up going in the hole economically. Unfortunately, the courts have a rule known as a potential income rule that they will hold you to some support level which you and your subsequent family cannot maintain or keep. The answer, of course, is to attempt to go to court and ask for a modification or a child support reduction based on your lower income. And the odds of getting that are slim to none. So I'm not real sure that I have an answer, or that the courts have an answer, or that we as a society have given you an answer. All of this coupled with the notion of affirmative action programs out there, meaning that you guys primarily are put at the back of the line, especially if there's a woman in front of you to get a job, regardless of whether the woman is an older woman or a younger woman, perhaps fresh out of school, no responsibilities such as child support or bills to pay. The other party gets hired first and you get hired last. I think that's one of the problems with our society, and if that caller is still out there, I would suggest that this is an issue that should be addressed directly to all state and federal politicians. And that would go for the previous caller also. This being an election year, it is now time to ask those politicians, both state and federal, what they're going to do to help you fathers. Whether they're going to make moving out of state or some unusual distance an issue about which you can raise a question in court. Now, of course, your federal politicians will tell you, incorrectly, tell you that they have nothing to do with domestic relations. They will fail to recognize the fact that they do deal with domestic relations when they pass bills and laws provided to them and for them from the Department of Health and Human Services. The Department of Health and Human Services then passes laws that require states to have in place certain kinds of domestic relations laws. And by the way, this is another flaw in the system. By the federal level agency, Health and Human Services, having requirements placed in the federal law that states have certain kinds of laws, the state agency then enacts those laws. Please understand that we, the people, you as a voter, have not been asked any questions along the line. You were not entitled to a vote. You were not entitled to approve. The law just gets passed, but you are required to obey the law. And that's the flaw in our democratic system. Federal agencies having state agencies pass laws over the heads and around the heads of the public. And that's where we get such things as guidelines for child support not voted upon by the citizenry. That's where we get the reduction or the elimination of the payment of child support as a tax exemption, because the agencies have gotten together and decided both federal and state laws for you. The public has had no input. And I would suggest to you to take a look at those kinds of laws where agencies are being sort of tyrannical in their power, and take an opportunity this election year to look at judges too. Don't forget, you guys have the power of judicial recall. And if the judge is not voting, or rather if a judge is not making a decision the way you as part of the public think that the judge should be making decisions, do a judicial recall. See if there are other fathers out there willing to have judges recalled because of the lopsided decision. Or perhaps deal with these issues of law at the ballot box. That's where you should deal with them. My objective here is to inform you. My objective here is to have you become active. Don't depend on me or any one individual to do it all. Get out there and do it yourselves, please. We're going to pause for now, and we'll be back in another week or so with another program. I would suggest that you stay tuned and get in touch with the Father's Rights Office. Thank you very much.